When Ethan first told me he wanted to start his own consulting firm, I was proud of him. We had always talked about building something meaningful together, something that reflected both our strengths. I supported him through long nights of planning, reviewing proposals, and analyzing potential partners. He said he wanted someone experienced and business savvy to help him set things up. What he didn't say, what he hid behind polished smiles and vague reassurances, was that the partner he had in mind was his ex-wife. When I found out, it was by accident. I was sorting through some mail that arrived at our apartment one morning when I noticed an official document with both their names listed as co-founders. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was a filing error, a typo, something easily explained. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I stared at the names, Ethan Morgan and Vanessa Hale, and everything inside me went cold. When I confronted him that night, his face paled for a second before he composed himself. "It's just business," he said, brushing off my questions. "She's experienced, and we're keeping things professional. You're overreacting, Lena." He smiled as though I were a child who had misunderstood something simple. That smile made something inside me snap. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things: late-night phone calls he took in another room, meetings that ran longer than expected, and messages he'd quickly hide when I entered the room. When I asked again, he swore there was nothing inappropriate happening, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now never left his side. I wasn't the kind of woman who spied. I valued trust. But trust had to be earned, and Ethan had already started chipping away at it piece by piece. One night, when he said he was working late, I decided to drive to the new office he'd been talking about. I parked across the street, watching from my car. Through the glass windows, I saw him laughing with her, Vanessa. His hand brushed against hers as they looked over documents together, their heads close, their smiles too familiar. It wasn't business. It was something else, something old being rekindled right in front of my eyes. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I drove home, sat in the dark, and let the truth sink in. I cried until my chest hurt, but somewhere between the sobs and the silence, something inside me hardened. If he wanted to play games, I would learn the rules and then rewrite them. The next morning, I called an attorney. Not to file for divorce yet, but to learn my options. The lawyer was calm, precise, and professional. She told me to start gathering information discreetly: emails, documents, anything that showed misuse of funds or breach of trust. So I did. Every night, after Ethan fell asleep, I combed through files, tracked company transactions, and quietly made copies. It didn't take long to uncover what I suspected. The consulting firm was more of a personal playground than a professional venture. Funds were being moved in suspicious ways: joint accounts, unreported transactions, and lavish dinners labeled as business expenses. Ethan and Vanessa thought they were clever, but they underestimated me. I had always been the quiet one, the supporter, the listener. They forgot that silence can be dangerous. It watches, it learns, it waits. One evening, I walked into the office unannounced. Ethan looked startled. Vanessa froze mid-sentence. I smiled politely. "Just came to drop off lunch," I said sweetly, setting the bag on his desk. He relaxed slightly, but his eyes were wary. I glanced around, taking in every detail: the joint nameplate on the door, the framed photo of them at a company event, his wedding ring conveniently missing from his hand. When I left, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt powerful. I had enough evidence to destroy everything they had built, but revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about precision. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness I once did. Weeks later, I scheduled a quiet meeting with a major client they had been pitching to. I knew the client's representative through a mutual contact and explained the concerns I'd uncovered carefully, factually, without emotion. I showed them the records, the inconsistencies, the lies. Within a week, that client withdrew. Within a month, 2 more followed. Their reputation began to crack, and Ethan couldn't understand why. At home, he became restless, irritable, suspicious. "Someone's sabotaging us," he muttered one night, pacing the living room. I nodded, pretending to be concerned. "Maybe it's just bad luck," I said softly. The night I left him, it was raining hard. I packed my essentials, left my wedding ring on his desk, and walked out the door. No dramatic goodbye, no tears. Just silence. He didn't even notice until morning. It took him 3 days to call me. "Lena, we can fix this," he said, his voice trembling between arrogance and desperation. "You're overreacting." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The lawyer filed the papers that same week. What followed was a storm of legal drama, accusations, and financial unraveling. The firm collapsed under audit. Vanessa disappeared from the picture soon after. Ethan's world fell apart piece by piece, just as he had done to mine. But my revenge didn't end with his ruin. I built something of my own. I took the skills I had used to support him and poured them into my own business. Within a year, I had secured contracts, gained recognition, and earned respect on my own terms. Clients who once worked with Ethan now came to me, drawn by my integrity and quiet confidence. I never badmouthed him publicly. I didn't need to. His downfall spoke for itself. Months passed. One evening, while reviewing new client proposals, I received a message from an unknown number. My heart stilled. "Lena, please, I know I don't deserve this, but I need to talk to you." It was Ethan. I stared at the message for a long time before quietly deleting it. Closure didn't come from hearing his excuses. It came from knowing I didn't care anymore. I was invited to a business conference a few months later. They wanted me to speak about ethics and leadership. Standing on that stage, I looked out at the sea of faces and felt something shift inside me. I spoke honestly about betrayal, resilience, and how strength isn't always loud. When I finished, the applause filled the room. That sound was my true revenge. Afterward, a man approached me, Daniel, a finance consultant with kind eyes and a steady voice. We talked about work, then about life, and then about everything in between. He didn't see me as someone broken or bitter. He saw me as someone who had survived. We met again. And again. Slowly, cautiously, I let him in. He was patient, never pushing, always listening. With him, I rediscovered laughter, quiet mornings, and peace. Not the kind of peace that depends on another person, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are and what you deserve. Years later, I heard Ethan had moved away, his business gone, his reputation in tatters. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if he'd ever realized how it all fell apart. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. Because I had won not through revenge, but through rebuilding myself. My life became the very proof of his failure and my strength. The woman he once underestimated had become everything he could never destroy. Sometimes revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about living so fully, so freely, that their betrayal loses its power over you. I didn't need him to see me rise. I only needed to rise. Now, when I walk into my office each morning, the sunlight spilling across my desk, I feel an unshakable calm. My name, Lena Morgan, etched on the glass door, reminds me every day that I am not defined by the men who failed me, but by the woman I chose to become. And that, I think, is the sweetest revenge of all. Lena Morgan had always believed that love was a partnership built on trust, on the quiet understanding that two people would stand together against the world. For years, she had been the calm in Ethan's storm, the one who believed in his dreams even when they seemed far-fetched. She stayed up with him during sleepless nights, helped edit his business proposals, supported him financially when his old ventures failed. She never complained. She was proud to be his wife, proud to watch him grow. But love, as she would soon learn, can sometimes hide rot beneath a polished surface. It began subtly, almost innocently. Ethan came home one evening, excitement flickering in his eyes as he told her he was finally ready to start his own consulting firm. He had always talked about it, but this time, his tone was different, confident, determined. Lena's heart swelled with pride. She offered to help him with the setup, to manage the books, to lend her own experience in administration. But he smiled and shook his head, saying he already had someone in mind to handle those things. Someone he trusted completely. At the time, Lena didn't think much of it. She assumed it was one of his old colleagues, maybe someone from his previous job. It wasn't until a few weeks later that she learned who that person was. The discovery came one morning when she was sorting through a pile of mail. There was a thick envelope addressed to Ethan, marked confidential. She wasn't in the habit of opening his mail, but curiosity tugged at her. Something about it felt different. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the papers inside. At first glance, they looked like standard business registration documents, company name, location, ownership details. But her breath caught when her eyes fell on the signatures at the bottom. Ethan Morgan. Vanessa Hale. For a moment, Lena couldn't move. Vanessa Hale. Ethan's ex-wife. The woman he'd promised he was long over. The woman he swore had no place in their lives anymore. Her mind spun in disbelief as she read the names again and again, hoping she was wrong, that maybe it was a different Vanessa. But it wasn't. When Ethan came home that evening, she confronted him, holding the papers in trembling hands. His face went pale for a second, then smoothed over with practiced calm. "It's not what you think," he said. "Vanessa has experience in consulting. She's just a partner. It's strictly professional." Lena's heart twisted. "You didn't think you should tell me? You didn't think it mattered that you're starting a company with your ex-wife?" He sighed, as if she were being unreasonable. "Lena, this is business. Don't make it personal. You're overreacting." Overreacting. The word echoed in her head for days. It was his favorite word whenever she questioned anything he didn't want to explain. She tried to convince herself that maybe he was right, that maybe she was letting insecurity get the best of her. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave her. It sat heavy in her chest, whispering that something was terribly wrong. The late nights began soon after. Ethan would claim he had meetings that ran late, or that he was networking with clients. His phone, once left casually on the coffee table, was now glued to his hand. He started guarding it like a secret. He smelled different too, expensive perfume that wasn't hers, faint traces of it on his jacket when he came home. One night, she decided to see for herself. Ethan told her he had a meeting at the new office, so after he left, she grabbed her car keys and followed him. She parked across the street from the building, watching through the rain-streaked windshield as lights glowed on the second floor. Through the glass windows, she saw Ethan and Vanessa together. They stood close, laughing, heads bent over the same document. His hand brushed hers casually, lingering just a second too long. The kind of touch that came from familiarity, not professionalism. Lena's chest tightened. Her fingers clenched the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. She wanted to storm in, to demand answers, but she didn't. Instead, she drove home in silence, tears streaming down her face, anger burning through the hurt. That night, something inside her shifted. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every lie, every deflection, every word he had used to make her feel small. She realized then that Ethan didn't see her as a partner. To him, she was just a convenience, someone to keep things steady while he indulged in old flames and new ambitions. But he had underestimated her. Lena decided she wouldn't cry over him anymore. She would make him pay, not through rage, but through precision. Revenge would be her calm, calculated masterpiece. She started with research. Quietly, methodically, she began gathering everything she could find about Ethan's new company. Emails, contracts, financial statements. At first, it was hard to access his files, but she'd lived with him long enough to know his habits. His passwords were variations of the same few things: birthdays, pet names, predictable choices. It didn't take her long to get in. What she found was worse than she imagined. Money was moving through strange channels, company funds being used for personal expenses, dinners, hotel stays, even luxury gifts. Vanessa's name appeared in several expense reports, labeled as consulting development costs. It was clear that the business was not only unethical, but also the perfect cover for their affair. Lena copied everything. Every file, every email, every invoice. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, she smiled through dinners, kissed him goodnight, played the role of the oblivious wife while building her case quietly. A few weeks later, she called an old acquaintance who worked in corporate law. They met in a quiet cafe where Lena laid everything out: documents, emails, transaction logs. Her friend's eyes widened as she read through them. "Lena, this isn't just unethical," she said softly. "It's illegal. You have enough here to ruin him and that woman both." Lena felt a small, cold satisfaction curl in her chest. "Good," she said simply. But she didn't want to destroy him immediately. She wanted him to unravel slowly, the way he had done to her, one lie at a time, one loss at a time. Her first move was subtle. She leaked select pieces of information to a client Ethan had been courting for months, a well-known corporation that prized transparency. Within days, the deal fell through. Then another client backed out. Ethan grew frustrated, blaming his staff, blaming bad luck. Lena watched him spiral, offering fake sympathy while feeding the chaos quietly. At home, he grew distant and angry. "Someone's sabotaging us," he said one night, pacing across the living room. "I swear, someone's leaking information." "Maybe it's just the universe giving you a sign," she said softly, sipping her tea. He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe not everything built on lies can last." He looked at her sharply, but said nothing. The night Lena left him, the rain poured down just like the night she'd seen him with Vanessa. She packed her essentials, just a few clothes, her laptop, and the folder of documents that had started it all. She left her wedding ring on his desk, next to a framed photo of their wedding day. The smiles in that picture now looked hollow. When Ethan discovered she was gone, he called her dozens of times. She ignored every one. By the time the divorce papers reached him, his company was already under investigation. The clients she had warned had quietly shared their concerns with the authorities. Ethan's accounts were frozen. Vanessa vanished soon after, leaving him to face the fallout alone. Lena didn't attend any of the hearings. She didn't need to see his downfall. She already knew how the story would end. She focused instead on rebuilding herself. She used the skills she had honed helping him and poured them into her own business. Within months, she launched her own consulting firm, transparent, ethical, efficient. She worked long hours, networked relentlessly, and built a reputation for integrity. Clients respected her. Some even confessed they'd left Ethan's firm to join hers because they trusted her more. That irony was not lost on her. Years passed. Her company flourished. She traveled, gave talks on business ethics, mentored women who had faced betrayal and come out stronger. Her name, Lena Morgan, became known in her field, associated with resilience and grace. Then, one evening, a message appeared on her phone. "Lena, please. I know I don't deserve this, but can we talk?" It was Ethan. She stared at the message for a moment, her reflection faint in the screen. Then she pressed delete. She never replied. A year later, she ran into an old friend who mentioned that Ethan had moved away. His company had dissolved, and he was working small jobs under other people's names. Vanessa was long gone. Lena listened quietly, offering a polite smile. There was no joy in his ruin, just closure. In the end, revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about power, the quiet, unstoppable power of moving on. One crisp autumn morning, as sunlight poured through her office windows, Lena looked at her name etched on the glass door, Lena Morgan Consulting. She smiled, sipping her coffee as her phone buzzed with new messages and opportunities. Her story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about rebirth. She had walked through betrayal, through heartbreak, through fire, and emerged unburned. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's living so well that their memory fades into irrelevance. Ethan had taken her trust and shattered it. But in the end, he had given her something greater, the strength to become everything he never believed she could be. And that strength was hers forever. Lena Morgan used to think that love meant trust without question. She believed that when two people said, "I do," it meant forever, that loyalty was as certain as the sunrise. Ethan had been her world once, the man she thought would build dreams with her, not destroy them. They met when she was 24, young and full of hope. He was ambitious, charming, the kind of man who could light up a room with a smile and make anyone believe in him. And Lena did. She believed in him more than she believed in herself. She supported him through every failure, every setback, every half-finished plan. When he couldn't afford rent during his first startup attempt, she paid it without complaint. When he needed emotional strength, she gave him her own. She was his stability, his anchor, or so she thought. After years of trying and failing in small ventures, Ethan finally seemed to find his footing. He came home one night glowing with energy, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Lena," he said, kissing her cheek. "It's finally happening. I'm launching my own consulting firm." She hugged him, proud, relieved, grateful that maybe, finally, all the sacrifices would be worth it. But when she offered to help, he brushed it off. "It's all handled," he said with a grin. "I've got a partner already. Someone I trust." The word partner lingered in her mind. But she didn't question it. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to believe that love didn't need suspicion. For the next few weeks, Ethan grew busier. He left early, came home late, answered texts in the other room, and spent more and more time at the office. Lena noticed, but she stayed quiet. She made dinner for two that often went cold. She stared at her phone, waiting for a message that never came. But she told herself this was what success looked like: long nights, hard work, sacrifices. She didn't want to be the insecure wife. Then one morning, while sorting through mail at the kitchen counter, she found an envelope addressed to Ethan. It was from the county business registry. She turned it over in her hand, curious, then hesitated. But something inside told her to open it. She slid her finger along the flap and pulled out the documents. Her heart stopped when she read the names listed on the company registration: Ethan Morgan and Vanessa Hale. The letters blurred as tears filled her eyes. Vanessa Hale, Ethan's ex-wife. The one who had broken his heart before Lena came into his life. The one he swore was part of his past. When Ethan came home that night, Lena waited for him in the living room, the papers on the table between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady enough to hold his gaze. Ethan froze for a moment, then shrugged. "It's business, Lena. She's good at what she does. It's not personal." Lena's throat tightened. "You went into business with your ex-wife and didn't think to tell me? How is that not personal?" He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're overreacting," he said. "You always do this. It's strictly professional. Don't ruin this for me." The conversation ended with silence thick enough to drown in. That night, she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. Every word he'd said replayed in her mind, each one heavier than the last. "You're overreacting." How easily he dismissed her pain. How quickly he turned her love into an inconvenience. The next morning, he kissed her goodbye as if nothing had happened. She forced a smile, but inside, something was breaking. The weeks that followed felt like slow poison. Ethan was barely home. When he was distant, distracted, and quick to irritation. He started dressing sharper, wearing cologne he hadn't used in years. When his phone buzzed, he'd glance at it and turn it face down. Lena noticed, but she didn't ask. She just watched. And waited. Then one evening, she followed him. He told her he had a late client meeting at the office, so she waited 10 minutes after he left, grabbed her car keys, and drove quietly after him. When she saw him park in front of a small downtown office building, she stayed in her car, watching. From her spot in the shadows, she saw him step out, holding a briefcase, and then she saw Vanessa. Tall, elegant, and smiling in that familiar, knowing way. Ethan leaned in to hug her, his hand resting at her waist longer than it should have. They disappeared inside together. Lena sat in silence for a long time, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Her chest felt hollow. There were no tears, not yet. Only a growing, icy calm. When she finally drove home, the night felt endless, the city lights blurring in her vision. She unlocked the door, walked inside, and stood in the middle of the quiet house that had once felt like a home. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The air itself felt tainted. The next morning, she didn't confront him. She made him breakfast. She smiled. She played the part. Because something inside her had shifted. The naive girl who believed love was unconditional had vanished. What was left was a woman who had seen betrayal up close and wasn't going to be broken by it. She decided that if Ethan wanted to play games, she would make sure she finished them better than he ever could. She began quietly. When he left for work, she began exploring his office at home. His passwords were easy. He always used predictable patterns. She accessed his emails, his financial records, and the shared company drives. The more she found, the deeper her disgust grew. Money was being siphoned from company accounts for personal expenses. Dinner dates, hotel stays, travel labeled as business development. Vanessa's name was everywhere. Ethan wasn't just betraying her emotionally, he was crossing legal lines. Lena copied everything. Every file, every screenshot, every invoice. She kept them stored on a flash drive, hidden in a place he'd never think to look. She even set up an anonymous email account, just in case she'd need to send something anonymously later. But she didn't rush. Revenge, she knew, wasn't about impulse. It was about timing. She wanted to hurt him the way he hurt her, not just emotionally, but where it mattered most: his pride, his success, his precious reputation. Ethan, oblivious, kept spiraling into his double life. He told her less and less, often vanishing for entire weekends with flimsy excuses. Networking, he'd say, or client conference. Lena would nod and kiss his cheek, smiling sweetly. She learned how to hide her hatred beneath a calm face. Every time he lied, she tucked another piece of evidence into her growing collection. She started planting small seeds of chaos. Anonymous tips sent to clients about the company's instability. Subtle rumors whispered through business circles. Nothing direct enough to trace, but enough to make people uneasy. Slowly, contracts began slipping through Ethan's fingers. Projects stalled. Clients backed out. He grew stressed, short-tempered, and paranoid. "Someone's leaking information," he ranted one night, pacing across the living room. "Someone's trying to sabotage me." Lena watched him quietly from the couch, sipping tea. "Maybe it's karma," she murmured, not looking up. He frowned but said nothing. The tension built. Then one day, Lena got a call from her lawyer friend, the one she had confided in about the documents. "You were right," her friend said. "This goes beyond cheating. They're laundering money through fake expenses. You have enough to take them both down." Lena thanked her, her pulse steady. She wasn't nervous. She felt powerful. That night, while Ethan slept, she printed copies of everything and packed her bags. She left her wedding ring on the nightstand with a note that said, "You shouldn't have underestimated me." Then she walked out, closing the door softly behind her. It was the last time she ever stepped into that house. By morning, Ethan's world began to collapse. His business accounts were frozen pending investigation. Clients received anonymous tips linking the company to fraud. Vanessa vanished, gone without a trace, leaving him to face the consequences alone. He called Lena repeatedly, his messages swinging between pleading and fury. She never answered. Months later, Lena was living in a small apartment across town, free and rebuilding her life. She poured her focus into launching her own consulting firm, one run with integrity and transparency, everything his wasn't. It started small, but her reputation for honesty spread quickly. Clients began to trust her, respect her. Ironically, many of them were people who had once worked with Ethan. They came to her quietly, saying, "We'd rather work with someone who tells the truth." She built her business piece by piece, finding peace in her independence. She learned to smile again, to sleep without waking in anger, to dream of a life that belonged only to her. Occasionally, she heard updates about Ethan. He was struggling. The firm had been dissolved, his assets seized. He'd taken a job under another company's name just to survive. Vanessa, someone said, had remarried and moved away. Lena listened, nodded, and went back to her work. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, just a quiet sense of justice. One evening, she received a text. "Lena, please. Can we talk?" It was Ethan. For a long moment, she stared at the message. Then, with a soft laugh, she deleted it without replying. He no longer existed in her world. That was her victory. Years later, Lena's firm grew into one of the most respected in her city. Her name appeared in business magazines, not as Ethan's ex-wife, but as a self-made success story. She gave talks about resilience and the importance of self-worth, mentoring young women who had been broken by betrayal. She told them, strength isn't born from pain. It's born from what you do after the pain. One autumn morning, she stood by the window of her office, sunlight spilling across her desk. Her company's name, Lena Morgan Consulting, shimmered in gold letters on the glass door. She took a deep breath and smiled. The air smelled of freedom. It was the scent of a woman who had lost everything and still won. Ethan once took her love and twisted it into weakness. But she had turned that weakness into fire. Revenge hadn't destroyed her, it had rebuilt her. In the end, her greatest triumph wasn't watching him fall. It was realizing she didn't need to. He was already beneath her, and she had risen higher than he could ever reach. Lena Morgan used to believe that love was sacred, unbreakable, a bond that could survive anything. She thought marriage was built on truth, that no matter how rough things got, loyalty would hold it together. Ethan had once been her entire world. The way he spoke about dreams made her heart race. The way he looked at her made her believe she was safe, chosen, loved beyond measure. They met at a networking event in the city, both ambitious, both hungry for success. She remembered the first time he laughed at one of her sarcastic comments, deep, genuine, the kind of laugh that warmed a cold room. It was magnetic. Ethan was charming, confident, and endlessly convincing. When he talked, people listened. When he smiled, people forgave. And when he said he loved her, Lena didn't doubt it for a second. The early years were filled with laughter, shared dreams, small apartments, and coffee-stained late nights spent planning their future. Ethan had always been restless, he wanted more, always more, and Lena loved that about him. She was his steady hand, the calm to his storm. When his ventures failed, she comforted him. When he doubted himself, she became his believer. She covered bills when he couldn't, stayed up helping him rewrite business proposals, and told him that one day, it would all pay off. She meant it too. She didn't care about money or fame. She just wanted them to build something real together. But dreams can turn into illusions, and love can become a weapon. The shift was slow, almost invisible at first. Ethan became distant, but Lena told herself it was stress. His late nights stretched into dawns, but she believed it was work. His compliments turned into critiques, small, sharp, disguised as advice. "You're too emotional, Lena. You worry too much. You don't understand business." Each word chipped away at her confidence until she started believing maybe he was right. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she should just trust him. The night he came home with a bottle of wine and excitement in his eyes, she felt a flicker of hope. "It's happening, Lena," he said, almost breathless. "I'm finally launching my own consulting firm." She smiled, genuinely thrilled for him. He deserved this after so many failures, didn't he? She wrapped her arms around him, whispering congratulations, feeling pride swell in her chest. But when she asked if he needed help setting up, he shook his head. "I already have a partner," he said, his tone casual, almost dismissive. "Someone I've worked with before. You wouldn't know her." The word "her" was a quiet blade. It pierced her for just a moment before she brushed it off. Ethan was allowed to have female colleagues. She didn't want to be the jealous wife. She didn't want to be that woman. Still, unease crawled through her veins over the next few days. He was secretive, guarded with his phone, always rushing out with the same excuse: client meeting. One evening, while organizing bills, Lena found a sealed envelope addressed to Ethan from the county office. She hesitated before opening it, but her hands trembled with instinct. When she saw the business registration form, the names hit her like a blow. Ethan Morgan and Vanessa Hale. The letters looked foreign, cruel in their simplicity. Vanessa Hale, the ex-wife. The woman he said was long gone, irrelevant, a mistake from another life. Her stomach twisted as the paper slipped from her fingers to the table. She stared at it until the letters blurred through her tears. That night, she waited for him to come home. When he finally walked through the door, humming to himself, she sat motionless on the couch. the papers spread before her. He stopped mid-step, eyes flicking to the documents, then to her face. "You went through my mail," he asked, his tone sharp, defensive. "Why didn't you tell me?" she countered. "Why did I have to find out this way?" Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's business, Lena. Vanessa's just good at what she does. It's not personal." Lena's voice broke. "You're working with your ex-wife, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning?" He rolled his eyes. "You're overreacting. It's professional. Don't start drama over nothing." Those words burned. Don't start drama. That was what he always said when he was caught. It wasn't the first time he made her feel like she was crazy for noticing the obvious. He walked away that night, leaving her sitting there, heart pounding, breath shaking, the paper crumpled in her fist. She didn't cry right away. She just sat in silence, replaying every word, every lie, every smile that suddenly felt manufactured. Over the next few weeks, Lena became an actress in her own home. She smiled when he was around, laughed at his jokes, pretended to believe his excuses. But behind that calm mask, something dark was growing. It wasn't hatred, not yet. It was awareness. A slow, cold understanding that the man she loved had been lying to her, not just with his words, but with his entire existence. She noticed the perfume on his shirt that wasn't hers. The lipstick smudge on a coffee cup that she didn't own. The way he locked his phone now, changed his passwords, flinched when she reached for it. Each clue was another brick in the wall between them. Then came the night that changed everything. Ethan claimed he had a late meeting with Vanessa. Lena waited 15 minutes after he left, then grabbed her car keys and followed. She parked across from his office building, lights dim in the upper windows. Through the glass, she saw them, Ethan and Vanessa, close together, laughing. Vanessa's hand brushed his arm, his head tilted toward her in that intimate way he used to lean toward Lena. The sight hollowed her. There was no confrontation, no dramatic outburst. She just sat in her car, fingers gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. Tears didn't come. The silence was heavier than crying. That night, when Ethan came home smelling of whiskey and perfume, she kissed him goodnight. He smiled, oblivious. But while he slept, she sat by the window, staring into the darkness. Her mind was quiet, but her heart was calculating. Love, she realized, had been her weakness. But knowledge, that would be her weapon. She would make him pay. Not by screaming or begging or leaving. No, Lena wanted him to feel small. To lose everything he thought he controlled. The next morning, she started collecting information. She went through his laptop when he showered, his files when he left for work. She found emails between him and Vanessa, not just business talk, but secret exchanges about keeping Lena out of it. They mocked her, called her naive. Vanessa even wrote, "She'll never see it coming. She's too busy playing house." Lena's stomach twisted, but she smiled. That was their biggest mistake, underestimating her. Over the next month, Lena became someone else entirely. Calm, deliberate, precise. She mirrored his lies with her own. When he said he had late meetings, she said she was going to dinner with friends. When he left, she investigated. She learned about their clients, their contracts, their financial movements. She discovered that Ethan had been embezzling funds, falsifying invoices with Vanessa's help. The money trail was messy but traceable. She copied everything: emails, transaction receipts, even screenshots of encrypted messages. She created a digital archive that would destroy him with one click. And still, she waited. Revenge wasn't about rage, it was about patience. She wanted the timing to be perfect, for everything to crumble when he least expected it. So she smiled through dinners, kissed him goodbye, and watched him dig his own grave. Every lie he told her only made her stronger. Every secret he had only tightened her grip on his fate. Then, as if the universe aligned with her plan, an opportunity appeared. Ethan's firm had just landed a major contract, a deal that could secure their reputation. The launch event was scheduled for Friday night, with media coverage and high-profile clients attending. Lena decided that would be the night everything changed. She sent anonymous tips to the press about the company's financial inconsistencies, attaching the evidence she had gathered. She contacted their biggest client anonymously as well, leaking proof of fraud. By the time Ethan and Vanessa stepped onto that stage, the storm was already forming behind the scenes. That evening, Lena dressed in her favorite black dress, the one Ethan used to love. She looked in the mirror and smiled, not for vanity, but for closure. When she arrived at the event, she stayed in the shadows, blending with the crowd. Ethan was radiant, all charm and confidence, shaking hands, taking pictures. Vanessa stood beside him, poised and elegant, pretending she owned the world. But Lena saw the cracks, the arrogance, the false pride. It was intoxicating to watch. Halfway through Ethan's speech, phones began buzzing across the room. Whispers started. Eyes turned toward screens. A journalist near the front stood and left hurriedly. Another began recording. Lena's phone vibrated with notifications, news articles, social media posts, leaked documents spreading like wildfire. Ethan faltered mid-sentence, confusion flashing across his face. Vanessa's smile froze. The room filled with murmurs, then chaos. Within minutes, the event collapsed into panic. The truth was out. Lena walked out quietly, unseen, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The sound of their world falling apart was enough. By morning, the company's name was everywhere. Fraud scandal exposes consulting firm. Ethan's photo was on every article, his reputation in ruins. Vanessa disappeared from the public eye. Investigations followed. Lawsuits. Frozen accounts. Everything he built crumbled to dust. Lena didn't gloat. She didn't even celebrate. She packed her bags and left the house that night, leaving behind a note. You shouldn't have lied to someone who believed in you more than you believed in yourself. She took nothing that reminded her of him. The ring, the photos, the memories all left behind like ashes. Weeks later, she started her own small firm under her name. It was humble, honest, built from nothing but her own integrity. Slowly, clients came. They trusted her because she was transparent, ethical, and genuine, everything Ethan had never been. The satisfaction didn't come from seeing him ruined. It came from seeing herself rise. She learned to wake up without resentment, to work without fear, to love herself again. Months turned into years. One afternoon, Lena got a message request on social media. It was Ethan. Lena, please. I'm sorry. I've lost everything. Can we talk? She stared at it for a long time, then smiled faintly and deleted it without replying. There was nothing left to say. Some apologies come too late. Some wounds are meant to scar as reminders. Years later, Lena stood in her corner office overlooking the skyline. Her company name gleamed on the door, Morgan Advisory Group. She had turned her pain into purpose. Reporters interviewed her about her success, calling her an inspiration to women in business. When asked how she overcame betrayal, she said, "You don't overcome it. You build over it. Stronger, higher, untouchable." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena poured herself a glass of wine and watched the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably still trying to rebuild, still blaming everyone but himself. But Lena didn't care. She had learned that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reclamation. Taking back power. Taking back peace. Lena Morgan's life had always been defined by devotion. Devotion to her work, to her friends, and most of all, to Ethan. He had been her beginning, her compass, her dream. When she met him at that downtown conference years ago, she hadn't planned to fall in love. He was magnetic, with a presence that drew people toward him like gravity. His smile was confident, his voice smooth, his ambitions infectious. He spoke about building an empire from nothing, about changing the consulting industry with innovation and integrity. Lena, who had always admired passion, felt herself pulled into his orbit without resistance. Their early days were simple and beautiful. They would spend nights talking about ideas, sitting in their tiny apartment surrounded by stacks of books and half-eaten takeout boxes. Ethan would sketch business models on napkins while Lena pored over financial data, grounding his wild dreams with her meticulous mind. She believed in him even when no one else did. When investors turned him down, she was there. When his first project failed, she stayed up comforting him. She loved him for his vision, not his success. He used to call her his anchor, the calm in his chaos. It felt romantic then, like a promise. But as years passed, she began to realize that anchors don't just steady, they can also be used to sink. At first, Ethan was charmingly reckless. He made bold decisions, but always with that mischievous confidence that made Lena forgive him. When he forgot anniversaries, he'd make up for it with grand gestures. When he broke promises, he would whisper apologies in the dark until she believed them. But slowly, that sweetness began to fade. He started comparing her to other women, subtly, like it was harmless. "Vanessa used to help me brainstorm like that," he once said absent-mindedly, before catching himself and brushing it off. Lena tried to laugh it away, though the name lingered. Vanessa, his ex-wife. A ghost from his past who always seemed to hover on the edge of his words. Then came the night that shattered Lena's faith in him completely. Ethan came home flushed with excitement, his eyes bright, his energy contagious. "I did it," he said, pacing the living room. "I'm finally launching my own consulting firm." Lena leapt into his arms, thrilled. She had waited years for this moment. All their sacrifices were finally paying off. But her joy dimmed when he added, "I'll be partnering with someone experienced in the field." "Vanessa Hale." Her smile froze. "Vanessa, as in your ex-wife?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan nodded, casual, dismissive. "She's a professional. We've both moved on. This is just business, Lena. Don't make it weird." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to be understanding, mature, trusting. But deep down, a quiet unease began to coil in her stomach. She told herself she was being paranoid, that love meant trust, that Ethan deserved the benefit of the doubt. Yet, something in his tone had changed. He stopped sharing details about his work. His phone became a private extension of himself, always face down, always on silent. He'd step outside to take calls, claiming they were client matters. Lena's instincts screamed, but her heart clung to denial. She cooked his favorite meals, left notes in his briefcase, tried to reignite the spark they once had. But every gesture was met with indifference. His eyes no longer softened when he looked at her. His touch no longer lingered. When she asked if something was wrong, he sighed and said, "You're too emotional. You always overthink things." That phrase echoed through her like a curse. The night she found the business registration document, her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold it. The envelope was addressed to him, and though she hesitated at first, something told her to look. When she saw Vanessa Hale's name beside Ethan's, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a signature. It was betrayal, written in ink. When Ethan came home that evening, she was sitting in silence, the papers laid out before her. "You're working with Vanessa?" she asked quietly. He froze, then forced a smirk. "You opened my mail? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd react like this." "Like what?" she asked, her voice rising for the first time in months. "Like someone who deserves honesty?" He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Lena, it's business. She's good at what she does. Don't start drama over nothing." That sentence fractured something inside her. Nothing. Their marriage, their trust, their shared dreams, all reduced to nothing. He kissed her forehead that night as though she were a child throwing a tantrum, and went to bed. Lena stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, the paper still in her hand. Her mind played every memory, every conversation, every subtle lie she had ignored. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet observation. She didn't confront him again. She didn't need to. The truth revealed itself in the smallest details. The scent of perfume that wasn't hers. A receipt from a restaurant they used to visit, now tucked into his jacket pocket. Vanessa's name flashing briefly on his phone before he swiped it away. Each clue was a blade twisting deeper, but Lena didn't bleed, not outwardly. She smiled, nodded, played the perfect wife. But inside, a storm brewed, calm, deliberate, and merciless. When she finally followed him one night, it wasn't out of desperation but confirmation. She parked her car across the street from the office and watched through the tinted windows. Ethan and Vanessa were inside, close, laughing. Vanessa touched his arm. He didn't pull away. Lena's world went silent. The city outside was alive, but she heard nothing, no traffic, no voices, just the echo of her own heartbeat breaking in her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't storm in and confront them. She simply drove home, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. That night, she kissed Ethan goodnight and whispered, "I love you," just to see if she could still say it without shaking. He mumbled it back half-heartedly, already drifting to sleep. One night, she found an email that made her chest tighten with both pain and fury. Vanessa had written, "She's too naive to notice. Just keep her pacified until after the launch." Ethan replied, "She won't be a problem. She's used to doing as she's told." Lena stared at those words until her eyes burned. She could almost hear his voice saying them, calm, confident, dismissive. She printed the email and folded it neatly, tucking it into her journal. Not as proof, as a reminder. That was the night her love for him finally died. When the firm's launch event was announced, Lena knew it was time. She spent the next week finalizing her plan. She gathered her evidence and sent anonymous tips to the press, each email accompanied by documents that could bury Ethan and Vanessa both. She reached out to their biggest investors, their competitors, even a few legal authorities. She made sure that when the truth surfaced, it would surface everywhere at once. On the evening of the launch, Ethan was radiant. Dressed in his tailored suit, surrounded by reporters and clients, he looked like the man she once fell in love with. But Lena saw through it now. His confidence was a mask, his charm a performance. She stood in the crowd, unnoticed, watching as he took the stage beside Vanessa. They smiled for cameras, the perfect picture of success and partnership. And then it began. Phones buzzed. Screens lit up. Whispers rippled through the crowd like an electric current. Faces turned, conversations hushed, reporters scrambled. Ethan's voice faltered mid-sentence as people began walking out. Vanessa's smile cracked as she checked her phone. Panic swept across her features. Ethan turned toward her, confusion morphing into horror. The headlines hit within minutes, Morgan Hale Consulting exposed for fraud. Lena watched from the shadows, her heart steady. She didn't need to see the rest. The damage was irreversible. She turned and walked out into the night air, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. She didn't look back when the siren started. By morning, Ethan's empire had collapsed. Accounts were frozen, contracts terminated, his name smeared across every news outlet. Vanessa fled, leaving him to face the fallout alone. Investigations opened, lawsuits followed. The man who once called himself untouchable was now a ghost of his own arrogance. Lena didn't revel in his ruin. She didn't celebrate. She simply packed her belongings, left the key on the table, and walked away. The note she left behind was simple: you shouldn't have lied to someone who believed in you more than you believed in yourself. She built her new life from the ashes. A small consulting firm under her own name. Clients came slowly, but they came. They trusted her because she was honest. She didn't need to manipulate or charm. She was competent, steady, and resilient. The scars Ethan left on her heart became her strength. Years later, she received a message from him. It was short, desperate. "Lena, I'm sorry. Please. I've lost everything. Can we talk?" She read it, smiled faintly, and deleted it without hesitation. She didn't need closure. She already had it. On a quiet evening years later, Lena stood in her office, watching the city skyline shimmer under the fading light. Her company name, Morgan Advisory Group, gleamed on the glass door behind her. She poured herself a glass of wine, feeling peace where pain used to live. Ethan's ghost no longer haunted her. Revenge had done more than punish him, it had freed her. In the end, Lena realized revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about redemption. It was about reclaiming her story, her strength, her voice. Ethan's downfall was inevitable. Hers was a rebirth. And as she stood there, bathed in the golden glow of her success, She whispered to herself with quiet triumph, "Never again will I let someone else define my worth." Lena Morgan's story didn't end with Ethan's downfall, it only began there. The weeks that followed his public humiliation were a strange mix of liberation and numbness. She had spent years being someone else's foundation, someone else's quiet strength, someone else's safety net. Now that he was gone, there was silence. No phone calls demanding answers, no footsteps pacing through the apartment, no voice dismissing her fears. Just stillness. The kind that felt both heavy and peaceful. Each morning, Lena woke early and sat by the window, sipping coffee while the city yawned awake beneath her. The skyline was a sea of glass and gold, buildings catching the light like mirrors reflecting new beginnings. She often thought about how strange it felt freedom. Not the kind that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from finally standing still. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for someone to change. She wasn't trying to fix, to nurture, to please. She was simply existing, breathing in her own time, in her own space. But freedom, she realized, came with its own kind of loneliness. The nights were long, and though she had peace, there were echoes in the quiet, memories she couldn't quite silence. She'd lie in bed and remember the way Ethan used to talk about their future. How he had once held her hand and told her, "We're unstoppable, Lena." How naive she had been to believe that love alone could anchor ambition. Sometimes she caught herself missing the man she thought he was, not the one she uncovered in the end. There were days when she doubted herself. Did she go too far? Was revenge worth it? Then she'd remember the sleepless nights, the lies, the way he'd looked her in the eyes while betraying her. And the doubt would fade. She hadn't destroyed Ethan. He had done that himself. She had simply stopped protecting him from the consequences. Her new firm started small. The first few months were slow, with clients trickling in mostly through referrals and word of mouth. Lena threw herself into work, not because she needed distraction, but because she needed purpose. Each client that trusted her, each project that succeeded, felt like a quiet vindication. She wasn't just rebuilding her career, she was reclaiming her identity. One afternoon, as she sat in her modest office surrounded by stacks of reports, her assistant poked her head in. "You have a visitor," she said. Lena looked up surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it?" she asked. The assistant hesitated. He didn't say, but he looks nervous. When Ethan walked through the door, Lena's pulse quickened despite herself. He looked older, tired, unshaven, a shadow of the man he used to be. His suit was wrinkled, his confidence gone. There was something hollow in his eyes. For a moment, she just stared, taking him in. Once, this man had been everything to her. Now he was a stranger wearing the remnants of a memory. "Lena," he said softly. "You look good." She folded her hands on the desk, expression calm. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" He let out a shaky breath. "I didn't know where else to go." "That's not my problem anymore," she replied evenly. He looked at her, desperation creeping into his tone. "I lost everything, Lena. The firm, my reputation. Vanessa's gone. She disappeared when things went south. I thought she'd stand by me, but she ran. I should have listened to you." Lena tilted her head slightly. "Listen to me when? When I told you she'd ruin you. When I begged you to be honest. Or when I warned you that secrets have a price." He dropped his gaze, shame flickering across his face. "I made mistakes. I know that. But I've been trying to fix things. I've been trying to start over." She studied him for a long moment. "You're good at that," she said quietly. "Starting over. You just don't know how to finish what you start without destroying everything in the process." His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The silence between them stretched, heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Finally, he whispered, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to see you. To tell you I'm sorry." Lena leaned back in her chair, her voice calm but firm. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you lost." He flinched. "That's not true. Isn't it?" she asked. "You didn't come here when you were happy with her. You didn't come here when your firm was thriving. You only came when everything fell apart." He swallowed hard. "You're right," he admitted. "But I had to try. You were the only real thing I ever had. Lena felt something stir in her chest, pity, perhaps, or the ghost of old love. But she didn't let it show. That's the problem, Ethan. You had something real, and you treated it like it was disposable. He looked at her one last time, his voice breaking. Goodbye, Lena. When he left, she didn't cry. She didn't feel vindicated either. Just resolved. The chapter was closed. That night, Lena walked through the city streets alone. The air was crisp, the lights reflecting off wet pavement. For years, she had walked beside Ethan through these same streets, holding his hand, believing they were building something eternal. Now, walking alone felt stronger. Each step was hers and hers alone. She stopped at a cafe they used to visit, ordered her favorite drink, and sat by the window watching strangers pass. For the first time, she wasn't haunted by his face. She was simply there, alive, present, unbroken. Months turned into a year. Lena's firm grew. Her name became respected in the industry. She hired a small team, bright, eager, loyal people who believed in her leadership. Sometimes she'd catch herself mentoring a new employee and think, this is what it means to build something real. Her story began to circulate quietly in business circles. People whispered about how she had survived a scandal and come back stronger. They called her the Phoenix of Finance, a name she found both flattering and ironic. But she never told anyone the full truth. Her revenge wasn't about public recognition. It was about personal closure. One evening, after a long day, she found herself standing on her apartment balcony, watching the sunset. The sky burned with hues of gold and crimson, like the world itself was being reborn. She thought about how much she had changed. Once upon a time, she would have been waiting for Ethan to come home, wondering if he'd notice her new dress or care about her dinner plans. Now, she didn't need anyone's attention to feel complete. The universe had taken her through fire, and she had walked out untouched. Yet, there was one moment that stayed with her, a memory she replayed sometimes when the world went quiet. It was the night of Ethan's firm launch, before the chaos unfolded. She remembered standing in the crowd, watching him bask in the applause, and feeling an odd calmness wash over her. She hadn't felt anger then, just a deep understanding that people like Ethan only learned through loss. Now, years later, she understood something even deeper. Revenge doesn't heal the wound. It simply closes it cleanly. What healed her was rebuilding, creating, becoming her own anchor. She smiled to herself, took a sip of wine, and whispered into the twilight, "Thank you for teaching me who I'll never be again." Lena Morgan's days began earlier now. She had grown accustomed to the quiet before the world stirred, when the air was still heavy with dew and her thoughts were her only company. Every morning, she would brew her coffee, stand barefoot on the balcony, and watch the city awaken. The hum of engines, the glint of sunrise on glass towers, and the distant chatter of early risers, it all made her feel alive again. For years, she had lived for someone else's ambitions, molded her rhythm around Ethan's chaos. Now, her life moved to her own pace, and that was a freedom she'd never trade again. But even peace had its ghosts. Some mornings, when she stood before her mirror, she could still hear echoes of his voice, the manipulative calmness, the half-hearted apologies, the way he'd make her doubt her instincts. There were nights when she would wake up from dreams of him, his hand reaching for hers in a crowd she couldn't escape, and she'd lie there staring at the ceiling, reminding herself that the nightmare was over. Healing wasn't linear. Some days, it came in small victories, closing a successful deal, laughing freely, sleeping without fear. Other days, it came in tears she didn't fight anymore. She kept Ethan's memory where it belonged, behind her. But life has a strange way of circling back. Months after their last encounter, Lena received an unexpected email from a journalist requesting an interview. The message read, "We're doing a feature on women entrepreneurs who've rebuilt their careers after personal or professional betrayals. Your name came up more than once." Lena hesitated. The thought of airing her past publicly made her uneasy. But then she realized the story wasn't about Ethan, it was about her. About survival, transformation, and power. So she agreed. The interview was held in her office. The journalist, A young woman with bright eyes and a sharp mind asked questions that dug deep, not into scandal, but into resilience. "What did you learn from losing everything?" she asked softly. Lena thought for a long moment before replying. "That you don't really lose everything. You lose illusions. You lose the version of yourself that tolerated too much. What remains is the truth. And the truth is stronger than any lie someone could ever tell about you." When the article was published, it went viral. People shared her story across social media with captions like "The woman who rose from betrayal" and "From broken to unbreakable." She started receiving messages from women all over the country, women who had been betrayed, manipulated, abandoned, and yet refused to stay down. Some wrote long emails, others sent brief notes of gratitude. One line stuck with her: "You made me believe that my pain doesn't define me, it refines me." It was then that Lena realized something profound. Her revenge had transformed into something larger than herself. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore, it was about every woman who had ever been made to feel small for trusting the wrong person. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a business conference for women entrepreneurs. Standing before a packed hall, she shared her journey, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to endurance. She spoke about betrayal, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "Sometimes," she said, "life breaks us so it can rebuild us into something unshakable. What they meant to destroy in you becomes your greatest strength." After the session, a woman in her 40s approached her, eyes glistening. "I saw myself in your story," she whispered. "My husband left me after 20 years and took everything. I thought I was done. But now I think, maybe I'm just beginning." Lena smiled. "Then make your beginning louder than your ending." In the months that followed, she started mentoring other women, helping them navigate business and emotional recovery. It wasn't an official program, just conversations, guidance, shared coffee, and tears. But it grew naturally, spreading through word of mouth. Soon, she found herself surrounded by a network of strong, ambitious women who had learned, like her, that heartbreak can be the soil from which new life grows. Despite her success, Lena never lost her humility. She still took the subway sometimes, still visited the same small cafe where she used to dream of better days. One rainy evening, while she sat by the window with a notebook, she noticed a familiar face across the street, Vanessa. Ethan's ex-wife, the woman who had been part of the betrayal. She looked different now, older, thinner, her expression distant. Their eyes met for a fleeting second before Vanessa turned away. For a moment, Lena felt an old ache stir. But instead of anger, there was only pity. Vanessa had played a dangerous game and lost. Lena wondered if she was still running, still chasing something that was never real. She turned back to her notebook, took a sip of her coffee, and smiled to herself. That chapter was long closed. Weeks later, life surprised her again. During a networking event, she ran into Daniel, the same finance consultant she'd met months before at the conference. He was easy to talk to, his humor dry but kind. Over the next few weeks, they met often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for dinner, always with effortless conversation that made her forget the years she had spent walking on eggshells. Daniel never asked too much about her past. He didn't need to. He simply accepted her for who she was in the present. He once told her, "You don't talk like someone who's been hurt. You talk like someone who's healed." She smiled, replying, "Maybe I've just stopped giving my pain permission to speak for me." Their connection grew naturally, gentle, unforced, and unlike anything she'd known before. For the first time, Lena allowed herself to feel warmth without fear. She realized love didn't have to burn to be real, sometimes it could simply glow. Ethan's name came up only once. Daniel had seen the viral article and pieced things together. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked one night as they walked along the waterfront. "Not anymore," Lena said. "I used to wonder why he did what he did. But now I understand it wasn't about me. It was about his emptiness. And I can't fill a void that was never mine." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "You've come a long way." Lena smiled faintly. "Yes. I've built a life I don't need to escape from." The two stood quietly, watching the lights shimmer on the water. Lena slipped her hand into his, not because she needed someone to hold it, but because she wanted to. It was a small difference, but for her, it meant everything. Years later, when her firm expanded internationally, Lena often reflected on the strange path that led her there. If Ethan hadn't betrayed her, she might never have found her true purpose. Pain had been her catalyst, and redemption her reward. Her story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her narrative, rewriting it with courage, and living so fiercely that the ghosts of the past had no place left to haunt. She kept a framed quote on her office wall, one she'd written herself. The woman who walked away from the fire didn't survive it. She became it. Every time she read those words, Lena Morgan smiled. Because she knew they were true. And though the scars of betrayal never fully faded, they became reminders, not of weakness, but of transformation. She no longer carried anger. What she carried now was quiet strength and a heart that no longer trembled at the memory of love lost, but beat proudly for the life she built on her own. When people asked her about her secret to success, she would simply say, "Never let someone's betrayal become your identity. Let it become your fuel." Lena Morgan had once been the woman who stayed silent while the man she loved tore her world apart. Now she was the woman whose silence commanded rooms. The same voice that once whispered apologies for things she didn't do now spoke with authority, compassion, and fire. And somewhere in a small, forgotten corner of the city, Ethan Morgan lived quietly, far from the spotlight. Occasionally, he'd see her face in a magazine, her name in headlines, her voice on a podcast. People called her an inspiration. He called her the one that got away. But Lena? She didn't think of him at all. Because her story wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. It was about the rise, the fall, and the rebirth of a woman who refused to be defined by betrayal. And in that quiet victory, in that radiant peace that came only after fire, Lena Morgan found what she had always been searching for: not revenge, not justice, but freedom. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the sheer curtains of Lena Morgan's penthouse, casting long, golden streaks across the room. She sat on her balcony, wrapped in a pale silk robe, sipping her coffee slowly. The city below hummed faintly, cars moving like tiny dots, people rushing to work, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place inside her. She had built this life from ashes, piece by piece, and each breath she took now felt like a small victory. She used to wake up next to Ethan Morgan, her husband, with a heart full of trust and dreams of partnership. But those days were gone, as if they had been part of someone else's life. The woman she used to be, soft-spoken, eager to please, always doubting herself, had been burned away in the fire of betrayal. What emerged from the wreckage was someone new, sharper, and stronger. Yet, there were still mornings when her reflection startled her, when she didn't recognize the confident, graceful woman looking back. She would touch her own face lightly, as though testing whether she was real, and whisper to herself, "You made it." Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A notification from the Business Visionary Awards Committee blinked on the screen. She had been nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year, a title that once felt out of reach. She smiled faintly, the corners of her lips curving with both pride and disbelief. Only 2 years ago, she was sitting in a courtroom watching Ethan and his ex-wife smugly defend their deceitful startup, the same consulting firm she had helped build from scratch. They had robbed her of her company, her reputation, and nearly her sanity. But now she was the one being recognized, and they had disappeared from the spotlight altogether. Sometimes at night, she replayed the turning point in her mind, the moment she decided she would no longer be a victim of circumstance. It had been raining that day, the kind of heavy rain that seemed to wash away pretense. She'd stood outside Ethan's office, papers in hand, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and clarity. She had discovered everything: the hidden accounts, the secret partnership with his ex-wife, and the lies that ran deeper than she ever imagined. When she confronted him, Ethan didn't even deny it. He smirked, as if daring her to react. "You wouldn't survive without me," he'd said calmly, as though he was delivering a fact, not a threat. That sentence had changed everything. She remembered walking out of his office that day without a single word, soaked from the rain, her heels splashing through puddles as she left behind not just her marriage, but her old self. It took months to rebuild, to rediscover her own power. There were nights when she cried herself to sleep, days when she questioned every decision, and moments when she almost gave up. But then she realized no one was coming to save her. The only person who could rewrite her story was her. So she began again. She used her experience, her connections, and her insight to create something new, a consulting firm rooted in integrity, mentorship, and transparency. It wasn't easy at first. Investors doubted her, colleagues whispered behind her back, and Ethan's shadow loomed over every boardroom she entered. But Lena kept moving forward, her determination steady and silent. With time, her company grew, drawing attention from industries that once shut her out. Now, years later, she sat on that balcony with her coffee, the skyline gleaming before her, and felt the kind of peace that only comes after surviving the storm. She no longer needed revenge. She had become her own proof that life after betrayal could be more beautiful than she ever imagined. Yet life had its own surprises. One afternoon, while she was reviewing quarterly reports, her assistant knocked softly and entered her office. "Ms. Morgan, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Lena frowned slightly. "Who is it?" "Ethan Morgan." The sound of his name made her chest tighten, though not with fear, just the faint echo of something long gone. She paused, then nodded. "Send him in." When Ethan walked in, she barely recognized him. He looked older, his once perfectly tailored suit hanging loosely on him. His eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had lost his grip on control. "Lena," he began, his voice quieter than she remembered. "I wanted to talk." Lena leaned back in her chair, her expression calm and unreadable. "About what?" He hesitated, glancing around her sleek office. "You've done well for yourself," he said finally, trying to sound casual. "I heard about your award nomination." "Thank you," she replied evenly. He shifted awkwardly. "Listen, I made mistakes. Big ones. I thought I could build something better, but things didn't turn out that way." He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice cracking slightly. "Vanessa left. The company folded. I lost everything." Lena watched him carefully, her heart surprisingly steady. There was a time when his pain would have broken her, when she would have felt the urge to comfort him. But not anymore. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said simply. He looked up at her, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Maybe we could start over." "I know I don't deserve it, but, Ethan," she interrupted gently, her tone firm but not cruel. "You're right. You don't deserve it. And I'm not angry anymore, but I don't owe you anything. You taught me what happens when I trust the wrong person. That lesson was expensive, but it made me who I am today. So in a strange way, thank you." He stared at her, speechless, the realization sinking in that she had truly moved on. Lena stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." As he left her office, she turned toward the window and exhaled. For years, she had imagined what she would say if she ever saw him again. She thought there would be satisfaction in seeing him broken, that revenge would taste sweet. But standing there, she felt only peace. The real victory wasn't in watching him fall, it was in knowing she had risen. The silence of Lena Morgan's penthouse was both a comfort and a reminder, a reflection of how far she had come from the chaos that once ruled her life. The city outside stretched endlessly, glittering with lights that pulsed like distant stars, a living reminder that life moved on no matter who got left behind. She sat curled on the edge of her cream-colored sofa, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold long ago. The night was quiet except for the faint hum of the city below, and as she stared into the skyline, she could almost see the echoes of her past, Ethan's laughter, the clink of glasses from their old home office, the smell of ink and ambition that used to fill the air when they were building their dream together. They had once been unstoppable, partners in love and business, united by an almost intoxicating belief that nothing could break them. But ambition had a way of exposing the cracks in even the strongest bonds. Lena remembered the first time she met Ethan's ex-wife, Vanessa. It had been at a corporate gala, years before everything fell apart. Vanessa had extended a perfectly manicured hand, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "So you're the new Mrs. Morgan," she'd said, her tone dripping with sweetness that felt more like poison. Ethan had brushed it off later, calling her jealous and manipulative. But now, looking back, Lena realized that the tension she had felt that night wasn't paranoia, it was prophecy. As their consulting firm grew, so did the tension. Ethan spent more and more time at the office, late nights justified by urgent meetings and client dinners. Lena tried to believe him, but her instincts whispered otherwise. She noticed small things first: the subtle change in his cologne, the way his phone never left his hand, the flustered tone in his voice whenever Vanessa's name came up in conversation. It wasn't until she stumbled across an email chain, one not meant for her, that the truth came crashing down like a wave. Ethan and Vanessa had quietly restarted their partnership, using Lena's contacts and strategies to launch a new branch of the firm behind her back. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, both emotional and professional. She had poured her heart into that company, sacrificed weekends, friendships, and countless hours of sleep to help it thrive. And in return, her husband had used her to rebuild his empire with another woman. The confrontation that followed was brutal. Lena remembered standing in their shared office, papers trembling in her hands, her voice shaking as she demanded an explanation. Ethan hadn't even flinched. "This is business, Lena," he said coldly. "You're too emotional to understand." Then, as if twisting the knife deeper, he added, "Vanessa and I work better together. Always have." That night, Lena packed her bags and left their home. She didn't cry, not at first. The numbness was worse than pain, a hollow space that echoed with disbelief. She spent weeks in a small rented apartment, sleeping on a couch and eating takeout, her mind spinning endlessly with questions. How could she have missed the signs? How could the man she trusted most turn her life into a lie? But as the weeks turned into months, something inside her shifted. The numbness gave way to anger, and anger slowly transformed into resolve. She began working again, reaching out to old contacts, pitching new ideas, and building what would eventually become Nova Strategies, a consulting agency that focused on ethical entrepreneurship, a direct contrast to everything Ethan and Vanessa stood for. It was grueling work. Investors rejected her at first, some calling her too idealistic, others labeling her a liability because of her public divorce. But Lena refused to quit. She'd spend nights drafting proposals, revising presentations until dawn, fueled by nothing but determination and coffee. Every rejection made her stronger, every setback sharper. Within a year, her efforts started to pay off. Small clients grew into larger ones, word spread about her honest and innovative approach, and soon, Nova Strategies became a rising star in the industry. Articles began circulating, calling her the comeback queen, and for the first time in years, Lena smiled without bitterness. She was no longer defined by what Ethan had done, she was defined by what she had built. Still, there were moments when the past crept in uninvited. Sometimes she'd see an old photo or hear Ethan's name in business circles, and the memories would sting like old scars reopened. But she had learned to control the pain, to channel it into power. Revenge, she realized, wasn't about destroying someone else, it was about proving to yourself that you could survive what was meant to break you. 2 years later, the universe handed her one final test. Ethan appeared at her office unannounced, his once arrogant confidence replaced by visible defeat. He looked smaller somehow, like a shadow of the man he once was. She could tell by his disheveled appearance and the desperate glint in his eyes that his empire had crumbled. "Lena," he said, his voice hoarse, "I didn't know where else to go." She gestured for him to sit, keeping her expression neutral. Inside, her heart was calm, steady. "What do you want, Ethan?" He hesitated, eyes darting to the award plaque on her wall, the Business Visionary of the Year title she had earned. "You did well," he said quietly. "Better than I expected." "I know," she replied. He looked down, wringing his hands. "I lost everything. Vanessa took the money and disappeared. I thought maybe we could talk." Start over. Lena studied him, her gaze cool but not cruel. Start over, she repeated softly. After what you did? I made mistakes, he said quickly. But we were good once, weren't we? You have to remember that. She shook her head, standing slowly. We weren't good, Ethan. I was good. You were careless. You took everything we built and destroyed it. And now you want forgiveness because you've lost what you stole. He tried to speak again, but she raised her hand. No, you don't get to rewrite this story. Her voice was calm, firm, the voice of someone who had found her power again. You once told me I wouldn't survive without you. But look around, Ethan. I didn't just survive, I thrived. For a long moment, he just stared at her, the truth sinking in like a slow burn. When he finally stood to leave, he looked broken in a way that no amount of charm could fix. After he was gone, Lena walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the skyline. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who had believed love meant sacrifice, who had allowed herself to be diminished in the name of loyalty. That woman was gone, and in her place stood someone unshakable. As the city lights flickered to life, Lena smiled faintly. Revenge wasn't a fire anymore, it was light. And it was hers. The next morning, Lena woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the glass. The city was quiet, washed clean by the storm. She stood in front of the window, coffee in hand, and let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like years. The ghost of Ethan's betrayal no longer lingered in the corners of her mind. It had been replaced by a deep, unwavering peace. She thought back to the moment she walked away from him, the trembling in her hands, the echo of the door closing behind her, the uncertainty of what would come next. Back then, she had been terrified. She didn't know who she was without him, didn't know if she could rebuild everything that had crumbled. But standing here now, watching the clouds part and the first rays of sunlight break through, she realized she hadn't just rebuilt her life, she had redesigned it completely. Her firm, Nova Strategies, was thriving beyond anything she had ever imagined. The office buzzed with life, filled with people who believed in her vision of integrity and purpose. Her name was now associated with resilience and innovation, not heartbreak or loss. And though she had been tested in the harshest way possible, she emerged with something far more valuable than success: freedom. Sometimes she would catch herself wondering if Ethan ever truly understood what he had lost. Not the money or the business, but her, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did, who had stood by him through struggle and doubt. But then she would remind herself that it didn't matter anymore. His lessons had already served their purpose. His betrayal had forced her to rise, to evolve, to see her worth. On weekends, she would visit her grandmother's old cottage by the lake, the same place she had gone to when the pain had been too heavy to bear. She had restored it, filled it with flowers and light, transforming it into her sanctuary. The air there smelled of pine and lavender, and the sound of water lapping against the shore had become her favorite kind of silence. One afternoon, she sat on the porch with a notebook in her lap, the sunlight glinting off the surface of the lake. She began to write not a business plan, not an email, but her story. Every wound, every betrayal, every moment of courage she thought she didn't have. She wrote about the woman who was broken and the one who rose from the pieces. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the first chapter was complete. It wasn't a story of revenge anymore, it was a story of rebirth. She smiled to herself, realizing that maybe her purpose wasn't just to lead others in business, but to remind people that they could rise again, no matter how deeply they'd been hurt. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant, another investor interested in a partnership, another opportunity waiting. She looked at the screen, then set it down and leaned back, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't in a rush to prove herself. She had already done that. The rain began again, gentle and rhythmic, as if the world itself was applauding her peace. Lena smiled, her heart quiet but strong. She wasn't the woman who had been betrayed, or the one who had plotted revenge. She was something greater, someone who had taken her pain and turned it into purpose. And as the last of the daylight faded, Lena whispered to herself, I won. Not over Ethan, not over Vanessa, but over the fear that once tried to define her. She stood, walked inside, and closed the door behind her with a calm certainty that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one that belonged entirely to her.